Hey up, it's your boy Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast, coming at you on the 20th of February. And I suppose we better talk about that unmitigated disaster that was UFC Fight Night 167, Anderson versus Blachowicz 2. Last week, I rambled a bit. Someone said it was 38 minutes of Jack trying not to talk about Blachowicz versus Anderson. We'll get right into it today because the co-main, which was sort of the main event of the card, which was actually the co-main, but it was the one that everyone was tuning in for, was a disaster, as we all imagined it would be, but in completely different ways. Now, I said last week that I thought this was really clever matchmaking because either Michel Pereira nukes Diego Sanchez quickly, or Diego Sanchez outlasts Pereira and Pereira gasses himself out. I was wrong. And clearly, so were the matchmakers, because what happened was that Michel Pereira fought smarter, and I thought he wasn't doing a bad job, getting behind the front kick, bullying Diego along the fence, using little bursts of action, and the odd flying knee and things like that, but not spazzing out and gassing immediately. That being said, it's Diego Sanchez at this point in his career, someone who has such a reputation for being explosive, should have been able to put him away. If you're fighting clever, you don't have to spaz out and cartwheel at him in the first minute. Well, Diego did the slow cartwheel in this one, but you don't have to spaz out and try and knock him out in the opening seconds with flying shit. But if you're a good fighter, you should be able to put Diego away if if you're a decent hitter and you're applying pressure. So it got really silly when, at the end of the second round, the klaxon goes, or whatever it is, klaxon? Air horn. And Michel Pereira does the stare down with Diego Sanchez. And you're like, why are you mean mugging? You were supposed to get this done 7 minutes ago. But of course, in the aftermath, one of the reasons we were all looking forward to it being a disaster was that Diego Sanchez has this wacky ass coach. And to be honest, it's just sad now. And the discussion has moved to, can the UFC do anything about it? Should the UFC do anything about it? Because, they are independent contractors, as I think it was the co-main event boys pointed that out. I was listening to them earlier in the week. They're independent contractors. You can't be all they're not our employees, but then also jump in on their lives. Well, though, you can, because you can drug test them at any time and you can make them wear a uniform. The whole independent contractor thing is bullshit. But, you can't be telling people that they can't choose their own coaches. I suppose you could try and make it more difficult. Are the UFC allowed to ban cornermen? I think that's under the control of the commission. But if you were doing if you were doing events in somewhere without a commission, which is the majority of the world, you could just put Diego on those and ban his cornermen. But it really is just trying to save face. And at some point, the easy way to do this would be to talk to Diego Sanchez and just say, "Look at yourself." Have an intervention, basically. Because, there's always been this thing where people are like, Diego doesn't have CTE, Diego's just always been weird and stuff like that. Firstly, Diego has CTE, or Diego has certainly some brain damage to some degree, because he has been the most hit-in-the-head fighter in the UFC, in the history of the UFC, over the time the statistics have added up. Add to that, the length of his fighting career, all the sparring he's been doing in between, it would be a miracle for his brain to be the same, well, not the same, but in the same sort of good state as when he started now. It's fucking bizarre that people just imagine that you can be hit in the head loads, and because you're not displaying the symptoms of outright CTE and just disastrous inability to keep yourself together, that you don't have any damage having been done to your brain. But Diego Sanchez has always been both weird and a bit of a dummy, Fabia. I don't want to slag off Diego Sanchez too much, but he has not always been a very clever man. That's not something that's changed since being hit in the head, and he has always been 100% into whatever he's doing, And when he left Jackson's the first time, which I think was before the BJ Penn title fight, when he did his lightweight run, I think that was when he was. He left and went to train with the Riberos. And if you're putting Diego Sanchez levels of energy into something like that, because I believe, whatever shit you're doing, Diego Sanchez is going to throw himself into 100%. This Sistema style bollocks that his coach seems to be doing, I'm sure he's 100% into that. But if you're on the mat with the Riberos every day, you're gonna get better, especially if you're a good athlete like Diego Sanchez was. But now he's 100% into. If you listen to him talk, it's always about anti-aging now, and then you listen to his coach talk, and he's all about, oh, well, what I do is I turn back time and blah blah blah. He's like, when I'm in my 40s and I'm still looking like 25, and just very strange. I mean, the guy had a very warped sense of time anyway. If you haven't seen it, go watch his interview with Luke Thomas. Haven't listened to the Ariel Helwani one. Got to support my boy Luke. And also, I think Josh Gross also did a thing for The Athletic where he interviewed Joshua Fabia. So Joshua Fabia is it Joshua Fabia? Yeah, Joshua Fabia is getting a fantastic PR tour out of this. But on that Luke Thomas interview, he's just moving the goalpost constantly. He is a brilliant snake oil salesman, or just, a typical snake oil salesman, because he keeps telling Luke how wrong everyone is and about what he does, and then never actually says what he does. He just makes vague allusions to all the shit that he practices. He's like, I'm a body guy, I'm a manager, I'm a blah blah blah, and then we'll never actually say what he does with Diego that shouldn't be ridiculed. He's also just like his how I used to say that Tony Ferguson's complete lack of self-awareness was one of his most endearing features, which is why I loved when then the Conor Habib thing kicked off and there was the brawl and the press conference. They just sort of let Tony Ferguson go out there and talk for like 40 minutes, and it was great. And even though Tony Ferguson has had mental health issues, he's always been a little bit of an eccentric person and just fun and wacky, but also very serious about himself at weird times too. So he'll wear the glasses and say really weird shit about how his elbows, he sharpens them on cheese graters, and then he'll be dead serious. But this guy, Joshua Fabia, his site is called like School of Self-Awareness, and he calls himself a self-awareness coach, but he has zero self-awareness. It's it makes you laugh, and then it makes you angry, and then it makes you laugh again. And I've just been flip-flopping on that all day. Through this whole Luke interview, he was like, check my site, my site will show you what I do. You go to his site, it's really nicely put together, by the way, but it's basically just like him showing the sort of Sistema bollocks. This guy comes at me in a straight line, and I go whoosh, slowly step off line with the left hook, and then I hit him in the belly with the right hand. That shit that you see, what's his name, Ryabko doing all the time, and Martin Wheeler, and other famous hacks. Got to be careful, because that poor lad, he's on my Facebook friends. I can't remember his name, but yeah, he basically pointed out that one of the coaches at UFC gym Singapore wasn't a black belt and was wearing a black belt, or was a blue belt and then was suddenly a black belt, and it just sort of like raised questions about it, and all these videos of him showing weird combative shit. And then the guy was like, I'm suing you, because it turns out in Singapore, like, if you ruin someone's business or damage their business, it doesn't matter if what you were saying was true. However, in a martial arts context, we have a fairly established proving ground, certainly in competitive martial arts, fist fighting, with wrestling. We have a fairly established meta and what works and what doesn't. And the thing about these sort of like Sistema woo people is that it's all slow motion. It's all to demonstrate a principle. And if you ever say, but they wouldn't attack you like that, they wouldn't be going that slow, they wouldn't just walk past you, they'd turn and face you, they go, whoa, 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 whoa. These are drills. They're to teach principles. It's the same shit Aikido people do. You're like, well, no, it doesn't look like a real fight because they're principles. And then when you get into a real fight, somehow without ever sparring, you're going to be able to apply them. Another just gold nugget that you will notice through that Luke Thomas interview, the guy keeps talking about all the places that he's flown to, and he's like, I get flown all around the world. That's his qualification. Like, when Luke says, these people are criticizing your coaching style, what would you say? And he's like, I get flown all around the world. Like, that's proof. And I don't pay for the plane tickets. And then within a breath of that, he's saying, have any of Diego's other coaches ever taken him out to the Middle East to train and get away? And then he goes, and I went on a scouting mission to Team Lakay in the Philippines to try and find some training partners for Diego. And I was listening to this, and the fucking Curb Your Enthusiasm theme was just going in my head. The best part was, like, he's going, people don't know what I'm saying to Diego in the corner. 100 doesn't mean go at 100%. And then you go, oh, this will be interesting. I wonder what 100 is code for. And he goes, 100 means you've got to get close enough to throw your 100 punches. Oh, God. Yeah, and then just the whole interview, he's like, I put out video to prove this today, blah, blah, blah. And then you go to his Instagram and it's private. You know, it's just, clearly he was like, this will prove him wrong. Oh, fuck, it hasn't. Just an unmitigated disaster. So what happened was, Diego got beat up for 2 rounds and then was sort of being squared up for the finish as Pereira was attacking him more and more frequently, and then gets hit with a knee in the head on the floor, opens up a big gash on his head. People got really pissy because Diego took the DQ win instead of fighting on, but the whole thing was daft. Herzog, and then it was Jason Herzog, who has been the traditional good referee of, or at least no scandal referee of the Fights Gone By podcast. But he said, I'm going to take a point from Pereira in a minute, to whoever was ringside, the official. And then he went over to Diego, and like they were having the discussion of whether he could continue. But the thing is, if you've decided that's a 1-point foul, surely it's not a DQ foul. If the man can't continue, then you say it's a no contest, and you do a technical decision, like they did in, trying to think of the last notable one. Oh, Belcher versus Bisping. You can't say that the foul was more serious because the results were more serious. It was either the foul or it wasn't. So, which is why you had that weird situation where he was saying, like, you got hit with an illegal bow, can you continue? And Diego goes, but if I don't continue, he gets DQ'd, right? And when you hear him say that, you go, oh yeah, that's really fucking stupid. Yeah, you would be an absolute muppet to continue. And anyone who is criticising Diego for not continuing is a fucking idiot. Because if I said you can get paid your base rate or paid double that and get the win, you know, you take that. Anyone in the UFC who isn't a fucking idiot would take that. Especially when you're Diego Sanchez and you've got like a 100k and 100k win and, show and win money breakdown. Yeah, I want 100k. Did he know he was losing? Yeah, probably, even though his coach was telling him he won the first round for some fucking reason. And I think that's the sort of encouraging thing about this one. This one, you saw Diego looking completely lost. And I think that firstly proves that, because people were saying, like, how can he be taken in by this when there's clips of him and Fabia doing, like, the Sistema style slow walk past punchy stuff going up on Twitter. And I think the thing that it proves is if you are a world-class fighter, you know, if you start not training the way that a world-class fighter does, and you're training with people who aren't world-class fighters, and you're not doing the confrontational sparring and the alive training, yeah, you will forget how that works. You know, if Diego Sanchez was completely washed, if he was kickboxing at Jackson Wink with, you know, good up-and-coming fighters each week, you know, however many times, he's still dealing with that. You know, he might have been getting lit up in those sessions. You know, they're probably not hard sparring all the time, but, you know, he might be getting embarrassed by younger talents, but he is working against them and going, okay, yeah, I have to be able to do this. This fight, he looked terrified. And I think that was what was most encouraging about this fight for me. It was the first fight where I felt like Diego Sanchez was like, oh, fuck, I'm really in over my head here. I am getting old. This dude is much bigger and faster and stronger than me. And I don't have any answers. And he's doing that weird, like, dabbing guard walking around the ring. And it's cool when Daniel Cormier does it amid his boxing. It's not cool when you think that's going to save you from, like, anything. The long guard is a thing in Muay Thai, obviously, but you use it at times. You don't just hold your hands there and go, this will keep him off. And Diego knows that. You know, Diego learned to kickbox. Diego learned to strike. He just forgot it because he was promised by this snake oil salesman something different. But then, you know, that's the whole thing. This guy's been like, oh, anti-aging, blah, blah, blah. Diego's looking better than he's ever looked before. And no, firstly, he doesn't. They both talk the same way, which is really annoying. Diego started, like, adopting this guy's cadence. And it was even funnier because this guy, both of them speak, well, Diego now does, but they both speak like people who they're considering their words and they're really being measured in what they're saying, but they're also dummies. So this guy goes to Luke, they're only looking at a part of what I do. And then he goes, if you want to look at my hole, and he paused for ages and I was just giggling about looking at this guy's hole. And then he starts talking about a wheel, and he goes, "I'm the rim," and I was just losing it. Oh. And then, this is just me running down this interview with Luke. You've got to go listen to it, because it's absolutely great. Then he goes, the guy who is saying he's Diego's manager as well as coach, an acupuncturist and doula and everything else, he says that the UFC is trying to set Diego up to be slaughtered by giving him all these monsters. And you're like, you're accepting the fights? It's the UFC recognize that Diego Sanchez still has a big fan following. They'll put him in against randomers if you don't accept fights with monsters where they want you to get knocked out. Or they'll just get rid of you and you go to Bellator and fight nobodies. But this guy just keeps going on about how, like, everyone's younger than him. And he goes, "Oh, no, and they're all a decade younger. Can we not get someone who's 6 years younger, 5 years younger, in their mid-30s maybe?" And then you go, "Oh, hang on, how old's Michel Pereira? Oh, he's 35. Diego's like 39. There's about a 4-year difference." Just amazing. Go listen to the interview. It's fucking astounding. But Michel Pereira has since been like, chicken man, just making fun of Diego. And he's come out of this looking worse than when he went in, which is astounding. Given how favourably the actual match played out for him, he still managed to come out looking like a dipshit. So, if you're joining me and you've watched this event, you know by now that it was garbage. The entire main card was awful. There was a disqualification due to illegal knee in the Brock Weaver fight. Rodrigo Vargas kneed him in the head illegally, got the DQ. Ray Borg missed weight again, and then won his fight, and then was like, "We gotta sort it out, guys. I've got a system, and I need to improve it." And you're like, you have never made weight, mate. What the fuck are you doing? I mean, everyone is kind to Ray Borg because of the just really trying stuff he's had going on in his family life with his son. Can't remember what he's got, but the health difficulties for his infant. And we all understand that he's in a very tricky position, but he's missed weight like 8 times now, and he was doing it before that, and he's been doing it long since that started. So you're just like, you've got a job to do. Please do the job. So the UFC have said that he's got to go up to bantamweight now. Which, fair enough. But I think he's missed weight at bantamweight before, too. Lando Venata versus Yancy Medeiros. I apologise, because I said this would be a fun one, and it wasn't really. It was just Lando Venata moving around and trying to crack Yancy Medeiros with right hand and then clinch up as he came in, and Medeiros following in and getting that. Kind of a underwhelming fight, to be honest. Blachowicz knocked down and out Corey Anderson with a nice right hand off a low kick. Nothing else really. I mean, people said the prelims were much better because you got largely some good stoppages on the prelims. I mean, in fact, really, like, the standout for me was, I'd say John Dodson versus Nathaniel Wood. I thought it was a really good fight. I thought Nathaniel Wood did a good job of trying to cut down the ring and catch Dodson circling out, and Dodson did a good job of circling out and actually engaging pretty well in this fight. He was using his overhand well, which he had sort of stopped using in favour of jabby arm punches with his left while he ran out to the side. And Dodson got the stoppage. So it was a really fun little scrap, actually. But I mean, I'm glad that events in the past, it was not great. I've got this habit for, when people complain that I'm like, too pessimistic about upcoming events, I do call them. Like, I can tell when an event's going to be bad, and that one was pretty bad. And it's been like that through most of January and February. There's been like good fights that we've been looking forward to, but some of these events have really been phoned in. One of the great things about the upcoming 248 card is that it's just, it looks like it's got a lot of meat on it. That's what I'm saying. But we got Felder versus Hooker coming up now, so let's talk about that now. If you remember, I willed this fight into existence. I said I wanted this fight. I thought this was a fun one, and they made it happen. And as a bonus, we haven't had to listen to Paul Felder's commentary in the last couple of weeks. This event's a bit weird. You wonder what they're doing, but then you know what they're doing. They're going to Auckland, New Zealand, as opposed to all the other Aucklands, But obviously New Zealand doesn't get a lot of UFC. Is this the first or the second? They don't get a lot, I'm telling you that much, in terms of UFC. So it's kind of like whenever they come to England or, Scotland. I don't think they've ever done a Wales one. But it's just like, you'll take what you're fucking given. And clearly we will. So this card is a little bit like that. Let's talk about Paul Felder versus Dan Hooker and why I liked it in the first place. Dan Hooker, I can't remember who he was calling out this week, but it was another one where you're like, ooh, that's a tough matchup, because he does do that. He called out Edson Barbosa, and the book is written on Barbosa. Like, dudes who can adapt and go forward and put on the pressure, they beat him. It's just what happens. You know, Michael Johnson is not a huge pressure fighter most of the time, but by getting on the front foot and forcing himself down Barbosa's throat, he completely overwhelmed him. Same thing with Beneil Dariush, minus the flying knee that won Barbosa the fight. He was a rag in the breeze in that fight. Whereas Dan Hooker came out and was like, I'm going to stand on the end of his reach and low kick with him. And it was not good. And then when he got hurt, he tried to like push in and put on the pressure, but he was pretty ineffective. And, you know, Barbosa was just grabbing double collar ties and kneeing him in the gut off it. However, we do like Dan Hooker a lot. You know, he's got a lot of skills as a striker, and I pointed that, like, when was that? I loved him against Ross Pearson back in 2016. Oh no, 2017. But the Mark Jacasey one, I think, really put him on the map. And that's kind of like, you know, the Jim Miller one and the Ross Pearson one, where he knocked dudes out with knees to the head as they came in. Those are the ones that, like, grab attention. But the Mark Jacasey one was really slick because it showed you Mark Jacasey, dangerous counter striker, had been like blowing out everyone up to that point, and Dan Hooker just came out and was like, "Slow down, mate," but he said it in like a Kiwi voice, and you know, he really took the wind out of Jacasey's sails. Didn't give him much to work with. It fainted him out, hit him when he wanted to hit him. Jacasey's jumping in on takedowns, and he threatened. I think Hooker got top position off takedowns in round 1 and 2, and then choked him in round 3 off a takedown attempt. But yeah, I mean, aside from that Edson Barbosa fight, he's looked really good. You know, he fought Gilbert Burns, who obviously very dangerous grappler, and knocked him out. Most recently fought Ally Akinta and James Vick since that Barbosa loss. The Vick one was real nice, actually, because I wasn't sure how that fight was going to go, because he got two like long, outside rangy people who love to knee shorter dudes as they step in. But he looked great in that. I think he hooked off the jab to get that one, and I was just like, oh, Dan Hooker. We know the City Kickboxing boys are Slacky fans, but Slacky is a City Kickboxing fan too. And then he fought Ally Akinta and naturally had the greatest jab in the division. Where did that come from? Who knows? So yeah, really in a good spot, Dan Hooker. Paul Felder has been sort of like perennial contender, but just keeps getting losses at the wrong times. You know, remember that Francisco Trinaldo beat Paul Felder during his run of like, what was it, 20, 30 wins? And they just didn't put him anywhere near the title picture because they're like, yes, that's an impressive record, but let me posit this to you. You're 40 and you don't speak any English. Get the fuck out. But Felder, like, good run aside from a trip up to welterweight to fight Mike Perry, which, he lost the split decision, but still, if Mike Perry were a lightweight, you know, you'd think that Felder should be too much for him. But aside from that, it's back to the Trinaldo loss in 2016. He's had a great little run. You know, he stopped Alex Ricci, Stevie Ray, and Charles Oliveira. That was that great. I think he elbowed all of them to death. And then he beat James Vick and Edson Barbosa most recently. The Barbosa one, split decision, kind of close. I thought, I think I sided with Felder in that one. The James Vick one was kind of like his Dan Hooker, Edson Barbosa performance, because James Vick, very provably, if you get in his face, he spazzes out. Like, if you just get in on him, you don't even need to be super technical about it. I'm not saying like pressure in, I'm saying just get in his face, because his hands are always down and then his head's up in the air, and he just, like, he can't really operate his build very well. But, like, Felder made a real meal out of that fight. Like, he just couldn't land good blows consistently, so he was trying to put pressure on Vic and walk him down. But the thing that I'm going to say is, like, one of the main differences between Felder and Hooker is that I would say that Felder is a more powerful fighter, and I think he's a more I think he's a better striker if he can get his hands on you. Better striker is I think he's more dangerous if he can get his hands on you. Like, he's really good from clinches. Like, the head post, he's elbowing dudes to death off there. Melted Charles Oliveira with that. Great with knees in the clinch and things like that. Good with a collar tie. I think if you can get the problems he has are like out of range kickboxing stuff. If he can make people engage him, he's really dangerous. Like, was it Danny Garcia in his UFC debut, just timing him with knees coming in and stuff? Beautiful. And then you watch him against, like, Darren Cruikshank, and Darren Cruikshank's turning him, and Paul Felder's just, like, following him around with the turning circle of a barge. And And I think that's the real difference. Dan Hooker's feet work well for outside fighting. Paul Felder really struggles to close down the distance after guys make it. I think for every Felder fight, like, this is one of the reasons that Felder's so interesting to me coming into the top end of the division, because he's considered a striker, but really what he does well is, like, maul. He does good striking out of the clinch. He strikes well against people who are trying to grapple. And I think that's an interesting question, like, up the top end of that division, Maybe he's not a super slick boxer or something like that, but if you can land good knees and good elbows on guys who are trying to wrestle you, that puts you in an interesting position against guys, in the division where a few of the top guys are strong wrestlers. It's kind of like that Cerrone-Habib match, which now no one will take seriously because of the Conor McGregor blowout, but that was always really interesting to me because I can't recall Donald Cerrone ever being held down. He's got all kinds of holds on the feet, but I just don't remember, like, anyone blanketing him. Anyway, I would say Felder, get inside, try and put the fence at Dan Hooker's back for as much of the fight as possible. For Hooker, I'd say stay out of range, low kick, try and keep him on the end of the low kicks, and then counterpunch off them if you can. One of the things I really love about the low kick is that you can really, if you've got a good left hook and a good right low kick, change it to a low kick, and then you're a real monster when you just come down off that. They're off balance, you start left hooking them. It can be a nightmare. And the other thing, a lot of Felder's takedowns when he wants to go to the ground are just sort of like short doubles along the fence, get the hands locked around the buttocks and pull the hips out. Dan Hooker very good with guillotines and things like that. But then you don't see Paul Felder like wildly level changing out in the open too much. Yeah, I think it's a compelling fight. I think the difference might be Felder's slow-ass feet, if Dan Hooker can do his usual stuff. I made that sound like I hate Paul Felder. I love Paul Felder. I just hate his jokes. He's one of my favourites at lightweight, and I've been asking for this fight for a while. So yeah, more matchmaking in the future, especially for the lightweight division, because like I feel like there are so many good lightweights, and lightweight is so stacked that no one can remember any of them, because people are just like, well, who would you have Habib fight next? Surely he's cleared out the division, aside from Gaethje. Do you remember that there are like 30 other really good lightweights out there that he hasn't fought? Anyway, running down the rest of this card, we've got Jimmy Crute, who I always like in the co-main against Michal Alexichuk. We're going with that. Michal Alexichuk, he is coming off that victory over... I mean, he just stopped Jean Vellante, which means he saved me from a good 12 minutes of Jean Vellante. So I'm already a fan. But very weird in that fight. He was bouncing around with his head up in the air. Who did he look like? Fuck. There was someone who used to do that. Like an old school boxer. I don't know. He looked like Bugs Bunny being like, put him up. But, bouncing around, left hands to the face, left hands to the body. And what you saw in that fight was, it was kind of like when John Moraga was beating Sergio Pettis, best striker in the flyweight division, except Joe Benavidez. When he was beating Sergio Pettis to the punch, and then Sergio Pettis would just take the punch and throw two punches back blind, and they'd catch Moraga, except Moraga couldn't really hit very hard, so it wasn't an issue. Pettis would take the one and deliver the two. For Michal Alexichuk, he actually can hit pretty hard, so he's throwing the punch and landing it on their face, and then they're slapping him with like a half-assed hook because they've been stunned. Lots of defensive issues there for him. Whether that'll show up against Jimmy Crute, who knows? Jimmy Crute, just coming off the first loss of his career, got Peruvian necktied, weirdly enough, by Misha Serkinov, because Misha Serkinov is the kind of guy who could just pop your head off from most positions if he chose to grab it. But before that, he'd beaten Paul Craig by Kimura, which is legit, because if you're just knocking out Paul Craig, I'm like, well done, you're a light heavyweight. But if you're submitting Paul Craig, I'm going, fair enough. Then he knocked out Sam Alvey, delivering a 1-2 punch for communism. And, he's a fun guy. I like him a lot. I would be interested to see how this plays out. I haven't seen a lot of Alexichuk on the floor. Matt, whatever you want to call it. You've got Karolina Kowalkiewicz, who is sort of like in the twilight of her career after that Andrade lost. We don't really consider her like a top-flight contender anymore. And Yan Jiaonan, who... she's the lass I'm talking about when I say famous for the side kick she always opens the fight with, or the hook kick, which they then cut into all the highlights, and then she's just 1-2s immediately after that. Fuck all else going on, really. You've got Magomed Mustafayev coming back. He was a really exciting guy when he fought Kevin Lee, but he's coming back to fight a guy, Brad Riddle, who's 7-1, hasn't really done much. Number 152 lightweight worldwide, and Mustafayev is like number 57, but it's lightweight. You know, those numbers could mean nothing. And then you've got Jake Matthews versus Emil Weber-Meek. I expect Jake Matthews is going to take him down lots, and Meek is going to elbow him in the brainstem a lot because that's his takedown defense. Kenan Song's on the card. I always like him. Don't know why we got... Oh no, only a couple of China... Well, is there a China connection? Oh, it's the airfare, isn't it? Yeah, that hemisphere. They're like, yeah, that'll be cheaper. And fucking Loma Lukbunmi's on. Loma Zumbini. She's taking on my girl Angela Hill. And that sounds bloody fun. The only other one Kai Kara France. He's good fun too. He's fighting Tyson Nam. Obviously, Nam been in this game forever at this point. Kind of a deceptive record because, you know, he's been around forever. Knocked out Dantas when he was the Bellator champion, I think it was, back in the day. But lost a decision to Sergio Pettis most recently. So he's fighting Kai Kara France. Kara France, good fun striker. Lots in common with Volkanovski. If you're looking for like a comparison, certainly doesn't resemble Daniel Hooker or Israel Adesanya that much in his style. It's a more Volkanovski-esque style. Lots of cross counters, you know, slipping inside the jab and throwing the right hand over the top. And then the pressure is on my boy Sean, coach at, is it Elevation Fight Team? You know, coach of famous strikers. He's got a girl, Shayna Dobson, going up against literally the worst fighter in the UFC, Priscilla Cachoeira, statistically the worst fighter in the UFC. Is she 0-4 now? You know, they brought her in to lose to Valentina Shevchenko. Oh, she's 0-3. They cancelled the bout with Lipsky because she got caught with diuretics, and they're still giving her another one. So pressure is on not to lose that one, but she is a straight line banger, sticks her face out all the time, and you know, she's the main training partner of Jessica Andrade, and you're going, Jessica Andrade could be a much better fighter if she weren't training with people like this. Right, I've been neglecting the mailbag for a couple of weeks, so let's get to that and do some questions. Hey Jack, meant to email you about this earlier, so someone may have beaten me to it by now, but I went to a Craig Jones seminar last Saturday where he showed the Get the Fuck Up guard / reverse Z guard, which was great, because I was going to ask about it in the Q&A, if he didn't show it. He basically showed that the options that you discussed in your Lamas breakdown, overhead sweep if they pressure too hard, dig for the guillotine if they only partially commit to the pressure, and technical stand-up if they do nothing. He also showed how you can sit back off the technical stand-up to hit a butterfly sweep, and if they dig their head in to the inside when you stand up, how you can Victor roll to the saddle. I've been trying it out on white belts, as one does, and it's remarkable how much response from the top player feeds into a very powerful counter from the bottom. Craig should probably give Lamas a cut of the royalties from his DVD. Just thought you'd be interested. Your boy, Alex. Yes, if you weren't here last week, we were talking. Craig Jones hit me up and said that he's doing a DVD on the thing that I said, you know, I was calling the Get the Fuck Up guard in the Lamas Filthy Casuals guide. But, yeah, I mean, it's just sort of like fitting in with a lot of my philosophy for especially no-gi stuff nowadays. And I think you're going to see it playing more into mixed martial arts too. Actually, maybe not as well. Clearly, the Lamas guard is more suited to mixed martial arts, but the thing that I'm talking about is like if you watch Gary Tonin or Gordon Ryan, a lot of their guard play is coming up to one knee. They just, you know, they put a hand on the mat and they come up to one knee, and you either, if you stay on your knees in front of them, they'll snap your head down and try and guillotine you or move to your back. But if you push into them, they're going to have that energy to fucking talking about energy. That's when you know you're full of shit. No, but you got their weight coming into you, and you can use that to sweep them. If you watch Gordon Ryan versus Josh Barnett, Gordon Ryan goes to his guard, then he puts a hand on the mat, starts coming up. Barnett goes, no, get on your back again, because you know Josh Barnett, as a top player, he has been very good at putting his weight through people, and he's one of the first people who'll say like there's too much sitting back and playing defense inside people's guards. But he pushes in on him, and a little bit later, Gordon Ryan's able to sweep him with a butterfly sweep, which is incredible against someone of Barnett's size and experience. So I think that actually the concept works for both no-gi and MMA, because, you know, in MMA, the guy is forced to keep you on the mat, so he will pressure into you if you start threatening to get up. Whereas in jiu-jitsu, you're more often given the space. Guys sit back, they'll like kneel in front of your butterfly guard and not give you anything. Or they'll go to a combat base or something like that. But they're very reluctant to give you the weight, so they You'll be surprised how often you can hit technical stand-ups against really good jiu-jitsu guys just because they like fall into the mindset that they're playing jiu-jitsu so you won't get up. And obviously it's not a goal to get back to your feet in jiu-jitsu, which is part of why people ignore it. But if you make sure you've got a collar, you can immediately snap them down from that and go to a front headlock or move to their back. If you've got their head, you can snap them down and move to a front headlock or their back. And those are they're not super effective attacks, but they are attacks that need to be addressed. It's quite hard to snap someone down and get out to a sprawl, from your butt, basically. But at some point, they will stop you and they will give you their weight and you can do something with it. So I think, standing up needs to be a more important part of guard play in both jiu-jitsu, no-gi, and MMA. Jiu-jitsu is going to be the hardest because there is, no real benefit to getting up, and guys tend to not let you get up while holding their collar. They'll break a collar grip as soon as it goes on, but you can get up with a collar tie in no-gi all the time. And it's even more interesting when you start playing it in with the sit-up escapes and guard retention once guys are moving around on you, from the Marcelo Garcia study and shit like that. But yeah, Craig Jones is awesome, and the reverse Z guard, I can't wait to watch that DVD. Actually, I should just start reviewing this stuff, because people always ask me what my favourite instructionals are, and I end up buying it all anyway. At least I could then, write it off as a business expense. Anyway, cheers, Alex. Actually, before we move on, a few years back, when Buchecha and Cyborg won the heavyweight and absolute at ADCC, was that 2011, 2013? I can't remember, but that was the year when everyone was just hitting technical stand-ups from the guard. They just started doing it. And both Buchecha and Cyborg did it at various points. And what they were doing was they'd get all the way up to their feet, they'd explode up. And the other guy would just grab around your waist or grab one leg like a head outside a high crotch. And then they do, what's it called? A head tilt, where you just go back of the neck with one hand, lift one of their knees from the mat with the other, and you just tilt them over, and you end up on top. That's in, I think that's in Stuart Cooper's highlight of the 2013 ADCC, or it might be 2011. But go check it out anyway. What's up, fucker? Hope all's well with you. So I've been noticing this trend last year at the UFC's weigh-ins, where when a fighter needs to strip, they'll bring the hoop and double it up with a towel on the inside. See pics because I suck at description. And he's kindly sent me some pictures of the towels resting on the hoop on the floor, then putting the towels into the hoop and so on. Yeah, this is weird. They've got a hoop with a thing that hangs from it, and then they put additional towels on the inside. I should tell you that the subject line of this email was Towelgate 2.0, so that's where this is going. Now, I don't usually go around wearing a tinfoil hat, Eddie Bravo style, but this kind of useless overcomplication twists my nuts. And I could swear I saw a couple of towels sink as if somebody were tugging on them from the inside. The people holding all that up are commissioners, not coaches, and would not let it slide if they felt anything suspicious. Then again, some blatant fuckery has slid right past them before, brackets DC Lewis pressing the towel, Gastelum leaning on his coach, and Till, who in his infinite scales of wisdom once decided to stand on one foot. So I would only be mildly surprised if this is indeed what's happening. I've looked around but can't seem to find anyone talking about it, so let's start the conversation. What in tarnation is up with the double toweling? The people need to know. I'm immensely grateful for the pointers you keep providing us. They've made you one of the most influential quote-unquote coaches of my career, and if I ever get to wear sponsored shorts, I will proudly don the glove and quill. Love and left shoulders, Tony's weightlifting coach. I've looked into this and I couldn't find an answer that convinced me. I've heard to keep the fighter warm and shit like that, but yeah, I don't know why you need to double up. It does mean that these people have to sort of hold it with their fingertips and pinch two pieces of cloth together. Very strange. The Darren Till story just reminds me of Frasier. They did an episode where the radio station was competing against another radio station to lose the most weight as a group. It's a great episode. It's got great lines like, "How could that be? I've added a salad to every meal," which is very fighter-level nutrition. Bro science. Dolce and George Lockhart could get 40 minutes of arguing out of that. But then their sports guy, Bulldog, his plan to cheat at the weigh-in, they had to all go on a big scale together, and he's like, "I'll stand in the middle, and you all lift me up." Anyway, cheers, Tony's weightlifting coach. Glove and quill patches for geese and shit coming soon. I should do that. Hey, Jack. the man who makes all other MMA podcasters look like contenders in the women's 125-pound division, fuck yeah. Now that our beloved Valentina has proved herself to be the world's greatest grappler by grounding and pounding the number one contender in the toughest division in all of MMA, let's talk about grappling. Why do you think we don't see more catch wrestling techniques used in MMA grappling? To see how effective many catch wrestling techniques can be, one need only look at Josh Barnett's submission of Dean Lister at Metamoris. Is it simply because catch wrestling is becoming a lost art? Or are there certain disadvantages to many of its techniques that make it less effective for MMA? We almost never even see small things like knee rides on the inside of the opponent's thigh to force movement. What up with this? Your boy forever, Ben. I think Josh Barnett and Sakuraba have both been wonderful for not only catch wrestling but submission grappling generally. But I think a lot of it's to do with like the times we live in. You know, Billy Robinson was considered like the emperor of catch wrestling because he came, he grew up in like the 40s and 50s in Wigan, where all the catch wrestling was happening, or catch as catch can, as they say, and went around the world being a successful wrestler, competing against other wrestlers in their own wrestling sports, and and then he found his way to Japan for pro wrestling because that was how you made money, and he was getting older. And Karl Gotch also, was he trained at the Snake Pit in Wigan and then went to Japan, and that was a big influence there. I think that the thing is, like, a lot of catch wrestling stuff is just like wrestling with dirty shit in, and when I say dirty shit, I mean dirty in modern wrestling context. Like the most famous submission in all of wrestling history is the Gotch toe hold, which, if you try and work out how you're going to do it against someone's guard or something like that, you're going to really struggle. But the Gotch toe hold existed because it was a way to turn a very stubborn opponent onto their back. They had to choose between getting their foot broken and then pinned while they were like, ow, screaming for assistance, or turning to their back and getting pinned. Like, that was the whole point of the Gotch toe hold. The Gotch toe hold wasn't there to make people tap out. It was the tap out was putting your shoulders to the mat. And the same is true of things like the Grobit or the Grovit, which is a Wigan famous, supposedly invention. But you can watch Kimura demonstrate it in old, like, 1940s judo footage and shit like that. But no, Kimura's like 1960s, isn't it? But anyway, you can watch footage of him doing it too. Like, it's a fairly well-known neck crank, but it was a big thing in Wigan in the Snake Pit because it made people move. I think part of the reason that catch wrestling isn't stronger today is that a lot of it's just wrestling, and a lot of catch wrestling fandom is kind of technique collection is what they sometimes call it. You just go like, oh, here are 1,000 weird arm locks. It's kind of like the old Eric Paulson videos where he shows you a submission flow or a lock flow, and you're going, well, 90% of those are useless if I can just get to the arm bar. Or Fujiwara, he was a catch guy. And that's the thing, like, it's a very, once you think about it, like, it makes sense that wrestling focuses on getting the shoulders to the mat because that is a position where you can, that's all the work to get their shoulders to the mat, and from there they're pretty useless most of the time. That's proving that you've dominated someone physically. But then once you consider it from a fight perspective, you go like, well, once you're trying to make a martial art specifically built around guys desperately trying to keep their shoulders off the mat, and that's the constriction. They're not worried about being on the mat, they're not worried about anything else on the mat, they're just worried about keeping their shoulders off the mat, so they're going up into like head bridges and shit like that. It's a very strange way to set up your attacks and shit. So yeah, everything is about rule set, and I think part of it is that there aren't really very many catch wrestling tournaments now. I mean, they're bringing them back. There's guys trying, which you got to respect. I think we're getting to a point where all of this is just grappling. I train in the gi, but it's the same. Like, if someone comes in from judo and they have sick arm bars, I'm going to go, that's a dope arm bar. Can I steal that arm bar? Show me how to do that arm bar. And they'll say, well, your opponent's desperately trying to do this in the 30 seconds before the ref stands you up, and you go, well, that bit's not necessary for me, but I still want to learn the dope arm bar, So I think all grappling is getting closer together, and I think that's the ideal. I think we're getting to a point where if you're like, my grappling art is the strongest, I think you're a bit of a dickhead. If you're talking about like the history of jiu-jitsu and the lineage and stuff, I think just like No, we're a bunch of guys and we meet up and we grapple and we get better as a result, and we steal things from people on YouTube. And if someone uses it at Abu Dhabi, we'll try and do it. Doesn't matter if they identified as a catch wrestler or a jiu-jitsu player or whatever. And in that context, I think, one of the wonderful things about submission grappling is that it's brought everything closer together, all the grappling styles. And it's also made people learn to wrestle, very, very easy for gi people to just not bother. But now you're seeing guys use wrestling to work out of the turtle, to get back to their feet in tournaments like ADCC. And especially because ADCC lets you, if you get to your knees within 5 seconds of the score doesn't count or some shit like that. It's weird, but then again, that's another example of the rules influencing what we do. But I would say, like, catch wrestling, I'd use it as a training tool, I think. Like, I've always believed that doing body sparring and doing point sparring and things like that in the gym only going to round out your game. You're not, if your focus isn't like point sparring, if you're not going, well, I just had to get the point, and you're actually just using it as a training exercise to get in and get out and try not to get hit and be more evasive and to use your feet and stuff, you can benefit enormously from that. I think using a catch wrestling rule set sometimes in the gym would really benefit people in learning how to control people, learning how to turn people, and do a lot of things that can just be trouble if someone starts doing them randomly on you in a match or an MMA fight or whatever. So catch wrestling is cool and all, but honestly, I think we should see, like, submission grappling ADCC rules as the equivalent of catch wrestling. Catch wrestling was a short time in Wigan. There were dudes coming back from World War II. They'd been training in India with Kushti guys, and they'd been overseas learning weird shit, and they brought it all back to Wigan, and it all just became part of the wrestling. Hence, catch me any way you can, or catch us as you can. Catch as catch can. Cheers, Ben. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. If you are a Patreon boy, new Advanced Striking 2.0 chapter, big old one on Anderson Silva just went up. Lots of doodles by yours truly, lots of audio. I think it takes about half an hour to get through the chapter, so it's a big old piece, as I have on me. And this is a couple of weeks ago we did the Bad Harry piece, so that's up there too. We'll have a new one coming in a bit. And if you're not a Patreon boy and you're wondering if that's up your street, there's a little taste of the high life if you want it at fightprimer.com. Go read the first part of that chapter, listen to the first part of it, enjoy, and then support the podcast. I've already plugged Fight Primer, so that's done. And then, if you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. I'm your boy, Jack Slack. You gotta try to understand my hole.